We let everybody in.
Yeah, just checking something. Letting them in now. Good afternoon, welcome everyone. Great to have you on this UK Export Academy Masterclass session, which for info is a part of Develop Your Global Market Entry Strategy. My name is Adrian Al. Some of you might have seen me before. I'm a UK Export Academy Events and Trade Advisor with the Department for Business and Trade, and I'll be your host for this afternoon session. As a way of an intro, I've been part of the UK government for over the last 30 years. During that time, I've served in many different guises. Equally, I've been lucky enough to have worked and operated all around the globe, meeting and working with some amazing people, including Kerry, our presenter for this afternoon session. So on to today's session, choosing your next export market, a data-driven approach. So for this session, this afternoon, as I mentioned, we're in good hands, and to present the session, we have a multi-talented, vastly experienced Kerry Stagg, who is an international research advisory manager here at the Department of Business and Trade. And many thanks as always to Kerry for her time and efforts today. Before we start, as always, just a few quick bits on session housekeeping. Microphones are muted for the duration of presentation, just to minimise any chance of feedback during the session. Also like to make you aware that the session is being recorded, so no need for any notes, just sit back, relax, enjoy it. Additionally, after the session, the recording and slides will be available to everyone via the EA website. Regards to Q&A, we'll have this function open. Please, understand as always that we do reserve the right to moderate any questions that arise accordingly. And lastly, please just keep your questions as generic as possible, as this is an open forum and it's never a good policy to go into any specific detail about your own particular business or any markets or sectors that you wish to explore, indeed already working. So thank you very much for that. So that's about it from me for now. I'll now hand you over to Kerry, or we'll get started. Cheers. Thanks.
Thanks, Adrian, and welcome everybody to today's webinar. Thank you very much for attending. We're going to be looking at how to select export markets using our data-driven approach. And this is actually the first of a series of 3 of our research masterclasses. So obviously looking at market selection today, and then next week at the same time on the 17th of June, we are looking at sort of desk-based research and how research fits into your strategy planning for export. Then the following week, we have the second part of our researching export markets program, which is more to do with in-market research, so actually going on a research visit to a country and how to carry that out. And then using all the research findings to develop your market entry strategy. So as I say, it's kind of a 3-part process that hopefully will be explained to you to help you enable you to do a really sort of good, thorough program of research. So we're going to talk today about market selection. And it's really often very hit or miss, very reactive, and leaving much to gut feel in terms of selecting markets for a lot of companies. So I've heard all sorts of reasons why countries might be chosen. Quite often it's a personal connection with somewhere, so somewhere that people have travelled, maybe they've got relatives or friends living there. It's very often the source of most inquiries and interest, often through a website, and obviously that can be a really good indicator of potential demand. Or it could be participation in an event on a particular market that made it sound very attractive. So sort of more, being told that somewhere's sort of up and coming, we've got free trade agreements and it's all very exciting. That can obviously influence that country choice. And any of those really can be valid. So, for example, I worked with, a few years ago, I worked with an architectural practice with family links in Ghana. which is not an obvious market, and on paper wouldn't have seemed attractive, but they knew the market really well. They visited there often, and they were able to go and sort of research and build networks in that market. So it was a good choice for them, and that was absolutely fine. I often hear of companies attending sort of international trade shows, and being approached by loads of potential partners, with, from all different parts of the world. And I think that that's really where you need to find this focus and find a place to start. So, we would advocate a more proactive, data-driven approach, using the methodology that I'm going to explain to you now. So this method is called the demand ease method. And if we follow the steps, what we do in the first instance is to filter the countries for consideration. So ideally, around 10 to 15 countries is a good number to start with. So it's kind of your long list of countries, probably no more than about 20. And that might be filtered on a region. So you might be thinking, well, I'll start with Europe, our close neighbours. Or you might want to start with English-speaking countries, for example. So there might be a sort of filtering initially to say these are the countries that I think are going to be of interest to me. We then look at what would indicate high demand for your product or service in that market. So that might be to do with sort of macroeconomic measures such as population, economy. It might be to do with your specific sector and the market size and growth in that sector, in that country. We then think about what would indicate ease of doing business. So this might be to do with language, it might be distance in terms of sort of shipping costs, it might be around logistics, tariffs, all of those sort of practical things. Or it can encompass sort of cultural aspects as well. So is that country, going to be the right kind of country culturally for your products or services, or indeed the way that you do business and the things that you prioritize? Depending then on how many of these sort of criteria for demand and ease you've identified, you then might want to prioritize, your criteria. So the model that we use uses up to 3 criteria for each of demand and ease. So we tend to sort of really stick to the key metrics so that we don't overcomplicate things. The next and probably the most challenging part is to find that information. So find the information that helps you to determine the criteria, and that's sort of, data for each country on each of the criteria that you've identified. And I'm going to give you plenty of ideas on where you can find such data. And then we plot the countries on a graph where ease is one axis and demand is the other, and it looks like this. So the top right box is where you want, that's going to be your best potential countries. So they would offer high demand, and potentially easy to do business with. They're going to be the countries to prioritize. However, if you're quite new to export, you might want to start with countries that sit in the bottom right-hand side. So they're small but easy markets. And then it's really, if you make a mistake, and you're just sort of learning, you're not jeopardizing your chances in a major market. So you start with the easier side of the scale before you work round to some of those more difficult countries. And that's what we would always advocate, especially if you're quite new or novice with exporting. So what sort of data might we use then? Well, generally, the data fits into to these categories. So we might want to look at demographics such as population size, whether it's an aging population, what the birth rates are, whether it's urban versus rural, all sorts of things like that might lend itself to for that country to be sort of the right kind of demographic and target market for you. Then there might be economic indicators, so broadly things like GDP, GDP growth, GDP per capita, disposable income, employment rates, and so on. You've then got social indicators, so they might be things around health or education, politics, religion, lifestyle. And then you've got sector data. So this is often where we focus when we're looking at specific products or services. So, if you're a food and drink business, if you're technology, advanced manufacturing, so that's really looking at the size of that sector within those countries. And then finally, import and export data. So you can look at whether your type of product or service is being traded internationally and where from as well. So if you want to look at, whether a particular country is importing gin from the UK, which is something I was looking at earlier for a company, then there's data out there to show that. So you can look at those sort of, common trading routes. In terms of sources, and as I say, so these are all links through to these sources of information within the document that you'll be sent. We've got some links there for demographics, so the CIA World Factbook, the United Nations are good sources. For economic indicators, my current favourite is the World Bank. I've also got the World Economic Forum, OECD, the IMF. They all have loads of good metrics. We've got social indicators from places like the World Health Organization, International Labour Organization. One that I use quite a lot recently is the Global Sustainable Competitive Index. So that's a measure of sort of, sustainability and sustainable purchasing, which is great if you're, if you've got a sort of environmental or sustainable kind of leaning. And the Good Country Index as well, which is contributions to science, climate, health, and world peace. That's quite a good one as well if you're, sort of trading on any of those kind of claims. You've then got sector data. So we subscribe to Euromonitor and Statista. There are other providers of this sort of sector, global sector data. And it's worth noting that you can get some free stuff from these sites, but you often come up against a paywall and you need a subscription. If you have access to a really good business library, or you have a student in your family or in your company doing an internship or something like that, then the university libraries as well have access to things like Euromonitor. So you could ask your student to go and access some of that data for you. So that's worth knowing. Trade associations are often a good way to find this sort of data as well, especially if you've got an international trade association of some description. They will often do global reports with market sizing and things. And then you've got import and export data as well. So all of that's sort of openly available. I use the ITC trade map. There are a couple of other sources on there as well. And then just thinking in a bit more detail about how you might choose what data is relevant for your business. So for example, to start with, if you've got a volume driven business, so you're selling a lot of items, maybe you're sort of more mass market rather than a premium product, then you might be looking at sort of overall market size and volume. You might be looking at demographics in terms of literally how many customers you might have. And obviously, if you're business to business, then that might include the number of companies there are in that sector in that country as well. If you've got a premium product, you might want to look to find things like what's the average price that customers are paying for your type of product, or the spend per capita on that product or service. And also you can find data out there on the luxury goods market as well, if that's where you sit. If your product is British designed or manufactured, or you're trading in some way on your Britishness, then you can look at the propensity to buy British goods and services, again through some of that import and export data. And also what I sort of mentioned earlier as well about sort of cultural alignment as well. So culturally, would your product or service fit within those overseas markets? If you're selling online, then the propensity to buy online, sort of e-commerce stats, and also internet capabilities might be relevant. And then again, sustainability credentials, they come up increasingly in, amongst new businesses. So looking at a country's environmental performance and their propensity for ethical purchasing can be relevant as well. So I'm going to talk through some recent examples of clients with whom we've conducted market selection. We use our market selection software tool, which allows us to input data, and it uses an algorithm to populate the countries on the chart. But after these examples, I'm going to show you a way of doing this sort of analysis yourselves without the need for a sort of whizzy software tool. So our case study number one is chocolates, hopefully something everybody can relate to. So this company produced sort of novelty shaped chocolates for gifting. And they sold them online and also through department stores and gift retailers. And they've been selling into Europe a little bit prior to DBT's intervention, mostly online. But they did have a few problems with shipping post-Brexit, and they wanted to look further afield to countries with a strong luxury retail market and appreciation of quality. So they did look at some key European markets. They were keen to make that work if they could. So Germany, France, Netherlands, Italy. They looked in the Middle East as well, UAE, Qatar and Jordan, North America, and then Australia, Japan, Hong Kong and Singapore. In terms of their demand criteria then, so we had some data from Euromonitor on boxed chocolates. So we were able to look at the size and growth and spend per capita. So, that's really kind of the holy grail, if you like, especially with food and drink products, are those sort of metrics for demand. We did consider looking at things like gifting occasions and luxury food and retail. But I think because we had that sector data and it was sort of, it's sort of on target in terms of the product, we chose to use that instead. And then in terms of the ease criteria, we looked at British friendliness because it's a British made product. We looked at the propensity for indulgence in those countries. So this is a sort of cultural aspect, which we got from this source called the Hofstede Cultural Dimensions, which is a really useful one for cultural comparisons between countries. And then also looked at customs and logistics as well, because they'd had some of those issues post-Brexit and were a little bit concerned that that might be a barrier. Other things that we considered were tariffs and also online purchasing. But again, the other ease criteria were deemed to be more important. So our sources of data then, Euromonitor, the International Trade Centre, so that's ITC Trade Map for import and export data, World Bank, and this cultural dimension, Hofstede's cultural dimensions. So our chart then looked like this. So we have got the United States and Germany up there are sort of highest in terms of demand, along with Australia and then Canada. So all sitting over in that sort of top right box, which is, the countries that offer the best potential. But over there on the sort of far right is the Netherlands. So in this case, certainly in terms of Europe, we would advise the company maybe to start with the Netherlands, and that being, a good, easy option that's still, got a reasonable demand before maybe moving on to some of those slightly more difficult but higher demand countries. And with the States, we would always say, that you need to break it down. You need to look at it in some cases state by state, or you might even start with a single city or sort of metropolitan area, because it's so big and varied, and there's lots of different rules state by state. So it's often worth breaking it down further. And I'm going to show you an example of where we've done some state selection as well, using this method. So moving on to our second example. So this is a company offering recruitment services, very specific recruitment services. So it's for recruitment for the construction industry, specializing in off-site construction roles in sales, design, and engineering, and so on. So they were looking in the Middle East, Australia, New Zealand, North America, and India. And in terms of demand, so this where we looked at the size and growth of the construction industry, as you would probably imagine, would be good indicators. We also considered and looked for data on site accommodation and modular buildings because that was something very specific that they were involved in recruiting for. That was a bit too specific in terms of the availability of data. Couldn't find anything that was, really robust sort of country comparison data on the size of those sectors. So we stuck with the size and growth of construction in this case. In terms of ease, it was really thinking about, the skills within the country. So did they have the right kind of skill level amongst sort of engineers and so on? Also got looking at UK expats because that seemed like an easy target for them, maybe initially in a market. Again, considered some other metrics around professional qualifications, work permits and visas, but again, that's quite difficult to kind of quantify in the way that we, that this model kind of works. So our sources of data then were Euromonitor, the Royal Academy of Engineering, and the World Bank. And this is what our chart looked like. So we've got kind of quite a spread really in terms of, India and the United States coming out highest in terms of demand. So around the construction industry, they were the ones showing the most potential. You've got Canada right down there in the bottom. It's not the smallest market, but its construction industry forecast was not the forecast growth was not very attractive. And sort of Australia probably would be the one that we would pick out and say, actually, that looks like a good option, maybe to start with. So that was that one. And then the next one is a marine consultancy. So this company has developed an oil spill detection technology. So it detects spills as soon as they happen and can alert the authorities so that quick action can be taken. So very much an environmental leaning sort of company. And they were looking quite specifically in the global south, and it was countries with coastline. So they looked in South America, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Southeast Asia as well. And their demand criteria then were around the length of coastline, crude oil production and the export of oil. So obviously places where, oil is leaving ports and there's the potential for this kind of, the spills to happen. And then in terms of ease criteria, that then focused a bit more around the potential environmental impact. So, impact on sort of the local, wildlife and so on, but also on aquaculture and tourism as well. So our sources of data were the CIA World Factbook, ITC Trade Map, the IUCN, it's the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, and also the World Bank, which I realise features quite a lot in these. So what did it look like? Well, you can see here quite an extreme sort of example here where Brazil is standing out very much as being the most attractive market. Obviously, they have a big oil, well, they've got a massive coastline. They produce a lot of oil, they export a lot of oil. So, that's very much sort of dominating. And the same in terms of aquaculture, tourism, the number of threatened species, so all of those sort of what we determined ease metrics were very strong as well for Brazil. Now, what we often do in a case like this is to say, right, well, we know Brazil's a really good opportunity, but we've got a whole load of other countries that are kind of bunched together. If we take Brazil out of the chart, then everything else will compare against each other, and it looks like this. So what we can see here is then Colombia has popped up to the top, the Philippines, Malaysia, both interesting prospects as well, in terms of that top right-hand box. So you can see here then, you know, if the company was thinking, well, we'd like to have somewhere in South America to start, and then we'd also like to sort of start somewhere in Southeast Asia, then that helps them to make some of those decisions. So they could say, well, you know, yeah, the Philippines looks like a good option in terms of the other region. Okay, so then our final case study is US state selection. So I've made this up in terms of, so this is a made up beer brand from the UK, although we have done some state selections for companies, but this is one that I made up in terms of you know, being sort of easy to understand. So we're imagining a fairly premium craft beer. And what we did was think about filtering the states. Obviously, there's 50 states, we can't include them all. So we filtered the top states that import from the UK. So you'll see which ones those are when we go onto the chart. We looked at, in terms of demand criteria, looking at beer consumption, also import of beer to each of those states, and also affluence, because we're talking about quite a premium product. And then in terms of ease, really it's around so taxes, because they can vary quite considerably by state, so sales taxes and federal taxes, and then the cost of doing business. So if we were thinking about setting up in the US and how much that might cost, and also business friendliness. So our nice craft beer, we want to have a welcoming and easy time of it in terms of the friendliness of local businesses. So our sources of data then, some government sources, the US Census Bureau and the US Bureau of Economic Analysis. You've got the Federation of Tax Administrators, and then CNBC, which is a news company, top states for business. They've done a kind of a survey with different kind of criteria, choosing the top states for business. So that's a really good source of state by state comparison. So really interesting chart, I think, because when you think about the US and, you know, where the states that we sell to the most, so California and New York often come up. And, you know, on this chart, it's really interesting because they sit very much at sort of highest in terms of demand, but also very much over on the more difficult side. So in terms of taxes, and cost of doing business and business friendliness, they don't score so well. Whereas you've got Texas, Pennsylvania, and Massachusetts there in that top right-hand box, which are looking more appealing from an ease perspective, but also, you know, still a good level of demand. And remember that these are all the sort of top 10 states that are importing, you know, goods and services from the UK. Okay, so let's have a think about without having our lovely DBT software tool, how can we do this sort of analysis? So the data that I've got here on this chart is the data for our chocolates, our first example, the box chocolates. And obviously we've got our countries listed there, and then the first three columns are our demand criteria. So the actual numbers. So we've got chocolate confectionery spend per capita. We've got the size of the boxed assortments category specifically, and then the forecast growth within that category. And then the next three columns are our ease criteria. So we've got British friendliness, which is the propensity to buy British goods and services. We've got our cultural dimension of indulgence. So the higher the score, the more likely they are to align with the UK in terms of indulgence. And then that sort of customs and logistics measures, so the efficiency of customs clearance processes, and that's a rating out of 5. Now, for each column, then, we calculate the median score and highlight the countries that are above that score. So using the median is best as it's less sensitive to outliers and skewed distributions, but you can use a ranking if you find that easier. So then we highlight all of those, all of the boxes there, which are above the median. So what we can see here, so if you remember our chart, we had the US being very high in terms of demand. So you can see there all three demand criteria boxes are ticked. And we had the Netherlands as our sort of easiest. And again, you can see there that all three ease criteria for the Netherlands are ticked in green as well. And then some of the others you can see. So I think France, Canada, Germany, we're all in there in terms of ones in the mix, and they've got kind of, the two of each in terms of demand and ease. So you can see how you could look at that analysis and say, right, these are the ones that I think, we can pick out as being the good opportunities. So that's it really. Hopefully that's helped you to learn a methodical data-driven approach to choosing your next export market. Thank you everyone for listening. And now we've got plenty of time for questions.
Very much, Kerry. Interesting, insightful as always. Yeah, we've got a question from Chun-Li Chow. They ask, could you please outline the criteria for selecting data sources for this analysis?
Yeah, so I think I explained a bit earlier on about how we select the data sources. So it really depends on your company. So if you're a food and drink company, you're probably operating in a particular category, and you might want to look at the category data, market size, growth, and so on. If you're making widgets, then it's the sales of widgets. Or it might be if you are making something a bit more generic, you might be making office furniture and you sell to, for example, the IT industry or, the manufacturing industry. There might be a particular industry that you sell to, and then you might want to look at the size and growth of that particular industry. So it's really, very much about choosing the right data for your company and the products or services that you sell.
Thank you very much for that. I'm just, as we speak, we've got no more questions.
Somebody's got their hand up.
Yeah, seen. Just give me a second. Allowed Mike Jeremy, if you want to ask your question.
Hi there. Yeah, great presentation, Kerry. Really impressed by all of that. What I'm kind of interested in is, are you able to, with the data, drill down a little bit further and explore what the costs of entry are?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult. Obviously, we're looking at this point. You're kind of at the level above that, aren't you? Because you're thinking about maybe some costs, but it's those sort of more, easier sort of it's sort of easy to compare countries kind of data. But yeah, I think then once you've identified where the potential is, you then want to get into those sorts of costs, and then I guess you've got to think through, supply chain, how much it costs for shipping, taxes, and all of those. So that's very much something to explore at the next level, which would be your kind of probably your preliminary desk research stage, which I could talk about some ideas and sources of how to look at that next week if you're interested.
And then just if I may, just another question. To do that sort of analysis, what are we talking cost-wise?
How do you mean in terms of DBT services or?
Yeah, so is there a cost involved in doing this?
So the service that we provide through DBT is if you are working with an international trade advisor, then you can ask them to refer through to my team, and the service is fully funded. We're very restricted on numbers, So there's some eligibility criteria for that. But in terms of, obviously, today's session was more about kind of helping you to maybe have a look at, start looking at that yourselves, rather than sort of needing to use external services. But yeah, you know, if you can do it yourself, a lot of the data is freely available.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thanks for that, Jeremy. Much appreciated. Paul, I've opened up your mic, sir, if you want to ask Kerry a question.
Can you hear me?
Can you hear you, Paul? Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, just a quick one. So, I mean, our company is a cybersecurity company, and we offer obviously like digital services. You know, obviously listening to this, most of it's based around physical products, it sounds like, and people exporting things and stuff like that. How does that work with services like digital products?
Yeah, we can absolutely do this sort of analysis in terms of digital services. And in fact, yeah, I have done some work on cybersecurity in the past. And Statista has quite a lot of data on cybersecurity services by country. So the data, it's really about, you know, thinking about the sector you're in, who your customers might be, finding the, you know, the data for the right sector. It can absolutely be done across services as well. I realise, you know, in terms of sort of ease of doing business, there's sort of probably some quite different criteria that you might put around that, because it's, you know, less about the logistics and the physical and the cost and all of that kind of thing. But yeah, it's very doable. It's just thinking about what those criteria are.
Amazing, thanks. Yeah, and how would we get more help with this? You did just mention something there.
Yeah, like I say, if you're working with an international trade advisor, you can ask them to refer through to our services in terms of market selection. Otherwise, it's really about sort of, you know, maybe having a go at using some of the sources that I've outlined and having a go yourselves.
Right. And what is your company called?
I'm part of DBT.
DBT. Okay, yeah. So we can ask to be referred through to DBT.
Yes,
Yeah?
if you're working with an international trade advisor, yeah.
I see. I understand. Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Cheers, Paul. Thanks. We've got another question from Jamie. Before I read out, just to let you know, I've put a link to feedback. We always appreciate feedback here at the Academy. So if you can just spend 2 or 3 minutes clicking on the link and leaving your feedback, that'd be absolutely marvellous. Jamie's question, after selecting countries, are there websites to check companies? Apologies if I missed that.
Yeah, I guess you mean sort of directories to look at potential customers or potential partners in the market. Yeah, in terms of, you know, once you've selected which country you're looking at. Yes, that there are directories out there. You can look at general business directories like sort of the Dun & Bradstreet type of thing. Or you can go to trade associations. In some cases, we'll have lists of members that might help. So yeah, there are databases and directories out there. Oftentimes they will need to be paid for. It's not, yeah, those sorts of things often come with a bit of a cost. You know, or it's a case of, you know, searching you know, through some of those sources. And again, a bit of what I talk about next week in terms of desk research might help to give you some good starting points on that as well.
Thanks, Kerry. No more questions. Yeah, just to mention what Kerry said, don't forget about sessions on the 17th and 24th of June. But yeah, no more questions, but thank you for those who did ask questions. We always really appreciate it. And yeah, thanks, Kerry, also. Happy to wrap it up there. Oh, we've got another question. Just bear with me.
I think
yeah.
I think the session's been recorded, hasn't it?
Yeah. So Prince, as I said at the start, yeah, we do record the session, and the slide pack also be available to everyone. After you just access that through the online at the EA website. But yeah, that's fine. But yeah, no, no other questions. Kerry, thank you as always. I look forward to hosting you again next week. And thank you all for attending this afternoon. Always really do appreciate it, and many thanks for that, and many thanks again, Kerry. And hopefully we'll see you all again next week. But whatever you're doing, have a great rest of the day. Take care, and see you again soon. Thanks. Thanks again,
Great.
Kerry.
Thanks, Adrian.
Cheers.
Thanks,
See
everyone.
Bye.
Come along next week.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks,
Cheers.
then.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.